I'd like to invite Gwen Robinson, Editor-at-Large for Nikkei Asia Review, who will moderate this panel session 2 called Are We Ready for the New Dynamics? So Gwen, over to you.
Thank you, Lydia, and good morning, everybody, distinguished guests and viewers. As you've heard, I think the previous panel set out very starkly and interestingly a lot of the challenges this region is facing. And in our next session, we're going to tackle the question of, is the region ready to meet the challenges of these new dynamics that we've just heard about? And I would first like to introduce, you've got details of our excellent panel, but just to run through very quickly, Dr. Aladdin D. Rillo, Senior Economic Advisor at ERIA, Mr. Yasu Ota, columnist at Nikkei Inc., and finally, Ms. Ima Abdul Rahim, Director of Public Policy, Southeast Asia for Facebook. So this is our wonderful panel who are going to give us their views on the issues that we're looking at here. So regarding our question today, whether the region is ready for the new dynamics, it's both a very hard and easy question. It's hard because there is no single answer, and it's easy because you could approach this question in any way and talk in generalities. But when we're focusing on this region, particularly Southeast Asia, we're dealing with a huge range of factors. And I think the starkest point is the overall growth figure for East Asia and the Pacific, which the World Bank has just put out in its twice yearly economic update report. And we had a figure of about 7% plus for the year ahead growth in East Asia and the Pacific. But if you strip out China, which itself is forecast to grow by 8.5%, we're looking at barely 2.5% for the region ex-China, amid what we've heard about this morning, falling labor force participation, employment rates, value chain slowdowns, etc. And as the World Bank highlighted, these figures mask vast and growing inequalities. Thailand, for example, has just revised down its meager growth forecast to just 0.7%. Myanmar, meanwhile, is deep in negative territory at more than 18% contraction. So these are some of the factors in the region. So it's impossible, I think, to give an overall view. Even so, we've got cause for optimism, as our panelists earlier pointed out. So I'd like to kick off this session by asking each of the speakers to address the overall question of gauging the region's ability to meet these new challenges, but also to take into account the vast disparities and highlight perhaps the greatest strengths and weaknesses across this region in meeting the challenges. So I think first up, we'll turn to you, Aladdin, and you can set out how you see it.
Thank you so much, Gwen, and good morning to all colleagues. I hope you can hear me well. I think that's a very interesting question, Gwen, whether the region is indeed ready for these new dynamics. Because when you look at these new dynamics in the region, as highlighted by the pandemic, I think we're talking here of issues related to digitalization, green economy, climate change, or sustainability in general. Looking at these issues or these new dynamics, I think for me, these are not actually new for ASEAN. I think these are issues that have been discussed before in the region. I think even before the pandemic, ASEAN has been addressing all these sorts of issues. And this is very much evident through various regional mechanisms and initiatives. So in a way, I think ASEAN has already recognized the importance of all these issues. And the way I see it, and the fact that some of these issues have already been incorporated into the regional agenda of ASEAN, for me indicates that the region is indeed ready to deal with these issues and challenges. What happened was that during this pandemic, I think COVID-19 highlighted more the need to better understand these issues, particularly for the region. And also, in my view, it has accelerated the need to come up with more regional action to address these issues. In my view, however, the more pertinent question here is to what extent that readiness by ASEAN has been translated into more meaningful and concrete outcomes on the ground. What I'm saying here is that we're talking about digitalization, sustainability. ASEAN has done something in this area, but the question is that enough? Have we done enough in the region to address these issues of digital transformation and sustainability, for example? Or is there anything else that we need to do? Or are there things that we're missing out? I think I'll try to put my thoughts along these questions, Gwen. So I think let me start with the question of, or the issue of digitalization. I know this was already discussed earlier in the previous panel, but I would like to provide my perspectives on this issue because this is an important issue right now during this pandemic that would also eventually shape the future of the post-pandemic recovery in ASEAN. If you look at what's happening in ASEAN, I think over the last 3 years or so, digital development has become an important priority for the region. And this is very much evident in the number of regional plans and statements that have been issued. Some of these are referring to, for example, digital integration, e-commerce, or data governance, among other priorities. And all of them also comprise both, in my sense, common and comprehensive agenda, and also some strategies or call for action for the region. Also, if you are following ASEAN, I think this year, early this year, the ASEAN Digital Master Plan 2025 was issued in the region to provide an overarching perspective or framework on how the region can facilitate the digital economy or support the digital economy. And last month, the economic ministers also issued some new initiatives, including, for example, the Bandar Seri Begawan Roadmap for Digital Transformation, and also the proposed establishment of the Digital Economy Framework Agreement by 2023. So looking at all these initiatives, in my view, I think all these initiatives for me indicate that ASEAN is indeed ready to embrace digitalization. But for me, one important concern or problem here is to what extent these initiatives are going to be implemented. I know that since I think 2018, a number of initiatives have been put out in the region, but I think the question now is whether the implementation is being able to measure up, in terms of what's going on in the region or the realities in the region. For me, one important or one glaring issue at the moment in the region is the widening digital divide. This is an issue that has been discussed for so long, but the problem is that it continues to persist in ASEAN. And if you look at the numbers are indeed telling. I mean, for example, some evidence suggests that the size of the digital economy in ASEAN is still very small. It only accounts for 7% of the total regional economy. And also 50% of the ASEAN digital economy are mostly concentrated on the urban areas. So that basically shows us already the digital divide. And I think the digital divide is also evident in terms of the gender dimension of it. Again, some evidence suggests that there are fewer women than men who have smartphones and have access to mobile internet. And also, if you look at the small enterprises or the SMEs in ASEAN, only 16% of the SMEs in ASEAN are digitally integrated compared to their large counterparts in the region. And I think the COVID-19, in my view, also in a way is widening the digital divide. I think it's evident that those who have computers and access to internet and also those who have the skills are able to work or move forward to do their work and also to learn more compared to those who don't have access to these resources, who are indeed falling behind. I think in my view, again, while ASEAN, again, is or digital connectivity or digital adoption in ASEAN is indeed expanding fast over the years, I think there's something missing there in a sense that the level of where it is now is still below where it should or it could be. And the reason for that is very simple. It's because of the fact that there are still gaps, okay, in different areas that support the digital transformation in the region. Here we're talking of gaps related to affordability, access, quality, also infrastructure, and also gaps related to education or skills as well as policies. For example, in terms of policies, e-commerce law is not well established in all ASEAN countries. And also data protection laws are only, I think, the most comprehensive ones can be found only in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore. So there is indeed a divergence in terms of laws that would support digital transformation. For example, I think there are a number of areas where ASEAN can focus on. I think in addition to building the digital infrastructure needed for this digital transformation, I think in my sense, there is a need to strengthen the payment system because the payment system is critical to be able to support the growing e-sector in the region. Secondly, there is a need also to establish the right skills and capabilities needed in order to ensure that people in the region are able to participate in a widely in this digital world. And thirdly, it's obvious that we need to have a more enabling environment. And here I'm referring to the ability of the region to develop the right policies and regulations to make sure that all countries in the region are able to support a more productive digital sector. I think another area that I would like to discuss, and this is related to this new dynamics, is the issue of sustainability. Again, we've been hearing about issues related to climate change, the low carbon transition, and so forth. But when I look at these issues, my view is that these issues, again, are not new to ASEAN. We've been dealing with these issues for a long time. And similar to digitalization, I think it's about time for ASEAN, in my view, to come up with a more holistic approach in terms of how to address all these sustainability challenges in the region. For example, I think there is a need to have a more integrated approach across different community pillars in ASEAN in order to make sure that the sustainability challenges in the region are being addressed more collectively instead of silos. I think the recent initiative in ASEAN, which is the ASEAN Framework on the Circular Economy, is a good step indeed, in a sense that this is the first framework in ASEAN, particularly on the economic side, that tries to put emphasis on how circular economy can be promoted to promote further sustainability in the region. But in my view, I think the implementation of this framework will be a challenge in a sense that you have to make sure, for example, that there is enough standards and harmonized laws in place to support all these circular economy products and services. I think another issue here is to what extent trade is open to these recycled products to make sure that non-tariff barriers and any barriers in general are eliminated to facilitate the trade of all these recycled products in the region. I think there's also the question of investment. I think for me, if you want to address all the sustainability challenges, you have to make sure that there is enough innovative systems to support the investment in the circular economy. And finally, the question of financing. At the end of the day, addressing all these challenges regarding to climate change and low carbonization issue would depend so much on how countries are able to come up with the right financing instruments, okay, to make sure that we're able to target the right investments to support all these circular economy concerns. And of course, at the regional level, we have to make sure that the region is ready enough, to come up with more innovative regional financing mechanisms that would help address these problems. I think within the region, sorry, for example, if we talk about the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, we have already indicated there are a number of areas to support sustainability in ASEAN across different dimensions. In here, I would like to only mention two important priorities. I think one is in terms of investment, how the region is able to proceed or facilitate greater investments in terms of clean energy, for example, in terms of supporting climate resilient infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure. I think these are indeed very crucial, particularly at this point in time. We're trying to come up with more stimulus measures. If countries can only focus on investing in all this climate resilient infrastructure, I think we're able to support both the post-pandemic recovery as well as the issues of sustainability in the region. Another important area here, as I mentioned earlier, is the financing. I think this is something I hope that the economic and the finance ministers in ASEAN will be able to focus on to come up with a more robust financing mechanism to address all the sustainability concerns. Finally, and I think moving forward, I believe that all these new dynamics related to digitalization and sustainability, climate change, and so forth, I think should be able to guide the future of regional economic integration. Because in my view, after 2025, or even now, the world is indeed changing. The region is indeed changing a lot. This pandemic has accelerated the need for us to understand better other aspects that might impact on the regional economic integration. Digitalization, sustainability are definitely key issues. Therefore, I would like to see that when we develop the post-2025 vision for ASEAN, particularly in the ASEAN Economic Community, that we will be able to come up with a more comprehensive, holistic approach, meaning that all these issues related to digitalization and sustainability should be part and parcel of market integration. Right. Because at the moment, those issues are being only referred to. But when you look at the actual initiatives within the AEC, they are not actually well entrenched. Therefore, I think moving forward, when we talk about AEC beyond 2025, I'm hoping for a more digitally driven and green market integration for ASEAN. I think I better stop here, and I look forward to your questions later on. Thanks, Gwen.
Thank you very much for that, Aladdin. You nailed some of the key issues. I do think, though, some of the main ones you brought up, particularly this issue of the overall trade frameworks, before Jay and others mentioned RCEP and your point about the need for greater harmonization and all that. But also we have a lot of issues on trade frameworks in the region. I don't think anyone has even mentioned China's push to join the revamped TPP and the deliberations over that. But also in this rise environment that Dr. Kirita pointed out earlier of, growing the strengthening US dollar and very marked increases in debt loads that governments in Southeast Asia have taken on. I think your point about the need for more spending on some of these key areas does raise the question about financing. And as you said, we need to think about creative ways, but that's definitely a further drain on an already cash-strapped region. So I'd like to turn to my colleague and friend Yasu Ota, sitting in Japan, and we'd be very interested, Yasu, also in your perspective from the Japanese viewpoint, looking over the region on some of these key issues. So I'm going to throw the ball to you.
Hi, thank you, Gwen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's not my intention to give the clear answer to your question, but I would rather to share with you what I think is a key to ASEAN to recovery from a Japanese perspective. Since I'm a journalist, not the economist, I will not speak based on the data or statistics, but rather on hunches and the intuition, if I may, Gwen.
You certainly may. You always have an original view, yes. So.
That's right. Yeah, I like to base my thoughts on what I have heard from the people I have met. mostly from the Japan and the US, and some from Germany, where I have stayed in the past. And I just learned a lot how ASEAN is viewed from outside. You know, the people of ASEAN are not necessarily so aware of it, but the US, Europe, and Japan are shocked and troubled by the economic downturn in ASEAN. I'm talking about Christmas. You know, the production in the ASEAN region is stagnant, and from the end of November now and to the mid-December, there are no products in the US and Japan to sell. You know, as you know, in the US, for example, the 90% of the year, the consumer spending is placed during the Christmas season, which is now, right? So it's not consumer durable, but rather commodities such as clothing and small accessories and the toys, which I believe that the ASEAN is good at to produce. So a few examples I have, what I heard from my sources is Nike, the shoe maker. One of the executives says, we lost 10 weeks of production when the factory in Vietnam, because the factory is closed for 10 weeks. It's quite pretty long. And the 90 US companies, including the New Balance, Gap, and the Levi's, sent a letter to President Biden demanding that the US should donate vaccine to Vietnam, because the factory in Vietnam is closed, so they are suffering. So the same thing is happening in Europe, and Adidas stopped its factory in Vietnam in July, and Puma is also in trouble. And talking about Japan, the supply of parts manufactured in Malaysia and Vietnam has been halted, and Toyota, for example, has reduced production in Japan and in Thailand because they cannot procure parts. And Panasonic has delayed the reporting of its factory for kitchen exhaust fans by the moment. And in Thailand, the food factories have been closed, as you are familiar with, Gwen. Nikkei is a food company, and 7-Eleven, the consumer the companies, are unable to procure fried chicken. So, and so they are so in problem. I mean, chicken. So we are missing the fried chicken in Japan. So this is a big thing for them. And Uniqlo also has a delay. They have to delay the release of new sweater. So winter is coming here, but the sweater is not available. So this is the big problem in the big market in the up north. And as they say, we want to sell, but we can't sell. We have nothing to sell. So this is a big problem. ASEAN is more influence on the global economy than many people in ASEAN realized. And I think in other words, there's a disparity, of course, and that Gwen said, disparity in the status of the infection crisis at the moment. I believe that this current disparity will make a difference in economic recovery, in the difference in the speed of recovery, and also quantitative difference. So that's a big thing. But what I am more worried about is the risk that the disparity will rather widen within the ASEAN after the crisis is over. And there is a risk that even after the recovery, there will be a difference in the strength of the economics. Yeah, everybody said that. And the gap among the 10 countries will be larger than before the COVID. And it means that gap in economic potential will widen. It's not just the difference in how effectively we can control the infection or how good our medical care is. It's about industrial supply chain. So that's why I always say that ERIA has the great resources in their analysis and researches and papers in supply chains. When I write the stories, an article, always I refer to ERIA's paper. So believe it or not, this is what I recommend to the editors and the journalists in the region. So whatever you want, numbers or the views, go to the resource in ERIA. The pandemic has more or less changed the inter-regional supply chain in ASEAN, because the flow of the people, the movement of people has stopped, and the movement of the service workers technically and the technicians has stopped. The traffic of parts and the components has deteriorated. And the supply chain has become fragmented as a result. So, for example, I heard this story from a friend of mine who works in a Japanese automaker. They used to concentrate the production of the automobile for the region in their plant in Thailand. Everybody is familiar with that, right? Thai is the center of the auto production for Japanese company, but now they are moving part of the production back to Japan. You know, this is basically just because of the becoming more difficult to transfer technology from Japan to Thailand due to the higher wall for coordination between Japan and Thailand. So they didn't want to, but they have to rewind their production from the ASEAN to Japan. This is a phenomenon that I'm observing. To put it more bluntly, to the power of Japanese headquarters to control the Thai and other nations' subsidiary is declining. So for the past years, business travel between the US, between Tokyo and Bangkok has been almost ill, right? So no friend of mine in Thailand, in Tokyo, can travel to both nations. For electronic companies, what I heard, especially from something called after process, cutting a semiconductor wafers and to produce the chips. This is quite a significant product, I think, when it comes to the US-China confrontation. This is very strategic material, so we have to focus on. There is a move to transfer the process from China to Malaysia, which means Malaysia is becoming more attractive to the supplier of semiconductors.
Give us the instructions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Mohan. Again, I would just...
Hello? I'm not sure what's going on there. I think
I'm not speaking. Somebody's voice I can hear.
Yeah.
Can I continue?
Yes, please.
Yeah, this is because there are concerns about the geopolitical issue with China. That's one thing.
Right.
And they are actually fleeing from China to Malaysia, where there is a concentration of the electronic industry of Penang, particularly. This is not directly related to COVID, but it is because trade friction between China and Japan, China and the US. So we have to think about that. And we need to rethink the way we build our supply chain around China. As a result, the relative importance of ASEAN will change. This is another example of the new normal. I think this is new normal. So initially, many multinational companies, including the Japanese one, thought that the COVID crisis will transitory and try to rid it out by enduring rather than restructuring their business. But now they have changed their mindset to configure their production and parts for the procurement under the new normal. So they cannot just wait and see. So they have to do something because it's just because waiting around is not going to solve anything, and they will only make things more expensive. So larger company actually are finding it very difficult to manage their supply chains in this region and they cannot fine tune their ordering, the procurement and the timely manners. So they have to order in advance. So that makes the big cost. The big cost of having the inventory and have advanced orders. This makes the management very difficult. The risk of the cost of inventory and ordering cannot be underestimated, I think. How to optimize the supply chain, both within ASEAN and other countries connected to ASEAN, will determine the survival of the company, which means survival of ASEAN. Even if over the next year or so, we will have to start again from the optimized state we are now. We will not go back to our original state. That's my opinion. We cannot just wait, and we cannot go back to the same position we had before. And the big challenge for ASEAN countries will be how well they fit into the new global supply chain. The supply chain, its shape of the supply chain is changing. We cannot expect that will go back to the original one. So the countries that are most charming, the charming countries to attract the new direct investment will have the advantage. That is not necessarily the same countries we have seen in the past. The advantage is not only the level of technology or the accumulation of the technicians and the skill of the workforce as it was before in the past, but I think labor cost and infrastructure and the digitalization and the social stability, and of course the healthcare system is going to be very important. So it may be an extreme case that, should I say that? But the Singapore, which is overly strict, they have very strict control of the infection, may not be attractive as before for foreign companies. So the winner and the loser might be different from now on. So foreign investors, including Japanese, are now looking closely at which ASEAN countries will be suitable for investment after the crisis is over. In other words, this could be an opportunity, and it's a chance for the latecomer of ASEAN. I mean, so those countries we can name it, right? What I would like to recommend to policymakers in the region is to think from scratch, from 0 point about the question: what are the selling points of their country? So this is a question they have to ask for themselves. In short, what I wanted to say that in order to prepare for new dynamics, there's a question Gwen gave us, we need to be self-aware of our competitiveness and to define the new competitiveness and have political policies that appeals to them and the investors. And of course, we must not forget that ASEAN is, we must not forget that the ASEAN is not forgotten, right? So, and in order to increase the attractiveness of ASEAN as a whole, ASEAN must come together and say loudly, hey, we are here, right? So everybody's busy in the world. The US, China, Japan is busy with themselves and talking about Quad, the TPP, whatever, the US-EU relations. But, in the middle of this situation, we have to raise our hand. This is, I think, of the major missions of the upcoming ASEAN summit. Let me stop here, and I have a bunch of things to talk about free trade, but get back to you, Gwen. Thanks.
Yasu, thanks very much. I think you highlighted a lot of, well, what you also highlighted were the contradictions inherent in the region that are getting more and more pronounced. And building on what Dr. Kirita told us in the previous session, this trend for both at the same time, companies leaving China for a variety of reasons, including not just Chinese, but American, Japanese, Korean, etc., into this region. But you also highlighted another trend we haven't really focused on, which is, for example, your example of Japan, some of those companies bringing back some production because they're finding it too difficult to control their subsidiaries in Thailand or whatever in this post-pandemic era. So I think that's a very interesting contradiction, but you also highlighted these contradictions across a range of themes. So we might come back to that if we have time. Although, speaking of which, I think we have to crack on. And so last but very not least is Ima from Facebook, who has done a lot of research on a lot of things in this region, but I think we'll possibly focus on the digital challenges as well. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to use the same caveat as Yasu said earlier. I'm not an economist, and I'm really cracking at this from the point of view of the private sector. It's a fairly new reality for me. 20 years prior to me joining Facebook, I was actually in that seat with think tanks and NGOs. So now speaking from the perspective of a private sector and seeing everything that's been happening in the past 2 years, I think it gives me a very interesting perspective as well. So I've been hearing all the other speakers. There's a sense of optimism on some parts. There's still a sense of there's a lot that we have to do, and I can't agree more. I think we've seen a lot of things, a lot of challenges in the past 18 months, but definitely the opportunities are also there. And what we see from the point of view, from my point of view, here in the company is absolutely actually more positive, especially for Southeast Asia. Gwen, you mentioned the research that we've done. I'll be very frank as well. It's research that my team, that our teams at Facebook have done here in Southeast Asia with Bain and Company, and so this is a study that we do annually, and this year we recently put it out. It basically tells us that Southeast Asia continues to lead digital transformation in Asia Pacific. It continues to expand by almost every metric, and we've seen the accelerated growth in 2020. I mean, since the pandemic, I guess, and as well, I think, there were consumption habits brought about by the pandemic. It has changed significantly. I mean, we saw COVID-19 as an acceleration of digital adoption and transformations, not just for consumers, but also businesses across a wide range of sectors. Since the start of the pandemic, Southeast Asia alone, led by Indonesia, added 70 million new online shoppers. And by the end of 2021, we expect each of those countries to have 70% or more of its adult population as digital consumers. So with this growth, we found that this was an opportunity for us, the private sector, to provide some leadership to help drive this transformation in partnership with the other stakeholders. So we wanted to make sure that we help in creating that digital pathway for local enterprises, and also a platform for communities to create meaningful connections and to support each other. So for the past 18 months, since the start of the pandemic, I think like everyone else, we adopted to a norm of working from home and operating very much from where we're sitting. Before the pandemic, I used to be on a plane every 2 or 3 weeks to cover the markets that I cover. I cover Southeast Asia. So that's Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. I used to have to travel to each of those countries, and of course, since March of last year, I've been working mainly out of Singapore. But all of these efforts that we have not diminished, and in particular, actually, I feel we've been busier than ever. And in particular, we've been almost called on to assist with improving health outcomes, to restore some confidence in the economy, and also to ensure that the recovery is sustainable. And so that's what we've been working on for the past 18 months. So for improving health, I think one of the things that we have done, in particular in partnership with a lot of governments, is using our tools and products to play a critical role in allowing governments and businesses to communicate with the public on measures being taken to protect the public and resume normal businesses and social activities. I think here in Singapore, you see the government very actively use our platforms, in particular WhatsApp, for example, using the chatbot to announce to let the communities know about the numbers, about safety measures, about changes in policy for overcoming social distancing measures and all of that. We've also worked with, of course, the WHO, partnered with them to launch health alerts on WhatsApp, on Facebook. We have our Facebook COVID-19 Information Center, which is now part of our platform, where people can come to find relevant and updated information, and also where they can find accurate information to curb a lot of the information that often is spread outside of that. That includes tackling misinformation as well, which I can happily go into, but I think not relevant for this forum. And COVID-19 has also demonstrated that data is a critical component of for informed public health response. So we have a program, Data for Good program, that we've provided trusted organizations across Southeast Asia with aggregated and anonymized maps on population movement to aid the response efforts. In particular in Indonesia, where we saw a very big surge, where Indonesia at some point in the past couple of months became the epicenter for COVID, and we saw that surge, and we continued to see numbers, high numbers in parts of Indonesia, and we see the numbers climbing as well in different parts of Southeast Asia. So we work with academic partners such as University of Indonesia, CSIS, Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit in Thailand, as well as other nonprofit organizations such as UNICEF, working directly with departments of health in the city, state, country level to provide that data using the data that we have. And then we've been called upon as well, in particular, where we saw a lot of small, medium enterprises really suffered during the pandemic and having to move online. And so realizing this, we have also worked with a number of different governments, a number of different ministries that tackle small, medium enterprise, assisting with digital transformation. So the recent study we conducted with the World Bank showed that 15% of SMEs had to close operations, and those who have reopened or survived are facing financial pressure and reduced demand. And women-owned businesses are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And so we have tried our best to help through different programs that we have. Our signature and flagship program, She Means Business, for example, are helping those. Also, there's reason for hope, and East Asia and the Pacific leads the world in optimism fostered by the use of technology. We found that 61% of SMEs in the region reported a fall in sales due to the pandemic, yet nearly half of business owners in the region said they were optimistic about their future. And then more than 40% of SMEs in the majority of regions made more than a quarter of their sales through digital channels. So perhaps most importantly in this context, those businesses that made at least 25% of their sales through digital channels were less likely to have seen a reduction in sales compared to the same period last year, and less likely to have reduced employees due to the pandemic, and more likely to have seen an increase in sales compared to the same period last year. So digital transformation, as we know, can play a critical part in helping businesses remain resilient in the face of the pandemic. And so this hopefully answers some of the questions, the question you raised, are we ready for that as well? So we offer a range of initiatives to support small, medium enterprise, from trainings, virtual trainings, on-demand learning. I mentioned She Means Business earlier, Boost with Facebook, Blueprint. Those are some of the resources that we make available in most of the ASEAN language, and partner with a range of industry, civil society, and public sector partners. And also we have welcomed increased collaboration with public sector across industries to ensure that small, medium enterprises have access to the training resources they need to start or grow their businesses. And this can be particularly impactful outside of the tier 1 cities, and could provide opportunities to marginalized communities. Of course, there's also financial inclusion and financial literacy as a core to empowering SMEs to start or grow their business. And through the programs that I've mentioned before, we launched several financial literacy programs, especially targeting women-led businesses. So like we said, while we have great improvements and the transformation in ASEAN is great in developing the digital economy, unfortunately, almost half of the region's population remain unconnected to the internet. And the problem of connectivity, I think, is still very widespread. So this reflects a connectivity gap between urban centers, rural areas, and difficulty of deploying sustainable digital infrastructure, where incomes are low, where people may be unaware of the benefits that the internet can bring them, or may lack the skills to use online services. And also, this pandemic has also highlighted that internet is no longer just a convenience, but a necessity. So people with reliable and affordable internet access have been able to more easily access and share critical health information, maintain contact with friends and family, work and learn remotely, and otherwise mitigate the adverse impact of social distancing, quarantines, and similar measures. So making the internet available to everyone is also a prerequisite for closing that digital divide. And yet, people also must also want to be connected and have necessary digital skills and opportunities to put them to use.
Right. And can you say what you see you know, what signs do we see that is increasing in the post-pandemic era, the efforts to connect more people?
Yes, So we are seeing. So for us, we're addressing that with several other in the private sector, addressing barriers to broadband connectivity. We're investing in new infrastructure, so to improve its own network, to improve network facilities, ensuring including partnerships with telecom operators to make infrastructure easier and more affordable. So we're trying to make sure that that's being brought into those that don't have that connectivity. So our infrastructure and connectivity investments in ASEAN is expected to deliver economic benefits over $70 billion US dollars in 2020 to 2024. And it's through several potential partnerships, from Express Wi-Fi to Express Wi-Fi platforms in Indonesia and the Philippines and Thailand, and we're exploring additional partners with other providers in ASEAN. Our infrastructure investments include the subsea cables. We're already an investor in several submarine cables in ASEAN, in addition to 3 new trans-Pacific cables connecting ASEAN that will go live in the next few years. We have edge networks to co-locate caching servers with all major internet service providers, and then also providing low bandwidth products with no data charges. So we've launched Discover, a new product that helps people stay connected and more consistently by enabling them to browse the internet using free data. So all of that, I think, that's where we can play a role from the private sector. But I think, we're aligned with, especially I think what has been mentioned by several other speakers. What we need is a supportive policy environment.
Right.
We're aligned with the approach to strike a balance between what companies can do to support ASEAN's recovery, but also how governments can put in place a conducive regulatory and policy environment to support investments and partnerships with us.
Okay, well, thanks, Emma. We might need to leave it there, except I do want to just get one more question in.
Sure.
You obviously have so many facts and figures in your head. That was a staggering figure that 50% of, you mean the ASEAN region, is not connected to the internet. That is about 325 million, 350 million people.
I have to check exactly if 50% in ASEAN, then where in, because again,
right.
You can't,
okay.
Singapore, as you, exactly.
There's still a lot of people, and yet
That's still a lot of people, definitely. That's why we
keep hearing that the region is about one of the most connected in the world. So it is quite staggering.
It's quite staggering, yeah.
We're saying, so actually, could you tell us though, between pre-pandemic, 22 months or 20 months ago, and now, how many more users were added, say pre and now? I've seen a lot of figures, but some suggest that Southeast Asia exploded with connection.
I'll have to come back to you on those exact figures of how many were added during the pandemic. There was a significant number of
right.
users, and we have that data. But I think, how much actually it added, I'm not really sure, and I can come back to you with that data for sure.
Okay, well, that's obviously the big story. One of the big stories in ASEAN through the pandemic was this.
Yeah.
As we've heard before as well. So Thank you very much for bringing us up to date on the digital front. And I'm afraid that you're all you speakers were so good and comprehensive that we've used our time up. So we don't really have any time for discussion, because I think the Secretary General is ready to. Yes, sorry, Yasu, I can see how disappointed you are. So if I may wind our session up by thanking all of you panelists for really excellent, and I thought the three of you actually fit very well together by covering different parts of the whole question. So I think we've come out much better informed than when we went in. And thank you very much also for people viewing. And I'd like to hand back to Lydia. Yeah, Lydia.
Thank you so much, Gwen, and to all of the panelists. That was really excellent and very interesting.